In this lecture, we will begin looking at the ways modern Western traditions depict nature. To begin, think about what nature means to you. What does it represent? Write down your answer and keep it for comparison. By the end of this lecture, you should be thinking about how your preconceptions of nature have been influenced by the traditions we cover. To help you brainstorm, enjoy the following 15 images. The content of the lecture will begin after the images. In this lecture, we will review several modern Western traditions of depicting nature. To begin, we'll go back a little to ancient Greece and Rome for context. Classical art is based on an Aristotelian argument that art is an imitation of nature. To say this is to say that there is something outside the artist's own mind that comprises a truer or greater reality than anything the artist can imagine or feel. There is a lack of interest in the artist's subjective interest, and there is a belief that art should be objective, that is, that art should be concerned with persisting, objective forms, the ideal, the essential, or what ought to be. Because of this, art, as Aristotle conceived it, is philosophical, a way of understanding nature while simultaneously using nature as a model for such understanding. Knowledge of nature experienced dramatic changes with advancements and discoveries made during the scientific revolution. Most are familiar with Sir Isaac Newton's 1687 publication, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, which is largely credited for establishing the mechanical nature of the universe. That is, the fact that the cosmos functions based on constant, predictable, systematic laws. Before this was an equally important event. Whereas Newton's Principia is typically seen as a culmination of the scientific revolution's end, it is Nicholas Copernicus's 1543 publication on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres that marks its beginning. In Revolutions, Copernicus challenged the widely accepted geocentric model of the cosmos and proposed instead a heliocentric or sun-centered theory. The theory itself started a revolutionary conversation among astronomers, mathematicians, and physicists that would take centuries to finally settle down, but it also became an inspiration for a philosophical metaphor rethinking humankind's place in the universe. The Copernican Revolution, as it is now called, indicates not just a major paradigm shift or change in thought, but represents a challenge to traditionally anthropocentric perspectives of the universe. By the 1800s, this newfound rationalism towards the cosmos fused with a classical heritage and resulted in an art movement called Neoclassicism, a style of harmony, order, clarity, and correctness. In this movement, the individual was only important as long as he or she represented general constants of universal nature, and art itself became something of a regulated mathematical system comprised of rules that strove to speak to the infallible machinery of the universal order. Thus, art of the 18th century sought to appreciate the apparent disharmonies, mysteries, and injustices of the world as simply parts of an actually harmonious universal machine. Jumping off the concept in Sir Isaac Newton's third law of motion, for every action there is an equal but opposite reaction, renowned poets like Samuel Johnson and Alexander Pope promulgated such concepts as Discordia Concourse, also known conversely as Concordia Discourse. This concept indicates what we now understand as an ecologically balanced cosmos. A summer storm counteracts a summer drought, a bountiful fall offsets a long winter, and these natural processes are supposed to model human ethics, show humans that they are simply part of a general frame or great chain of being. In other words, Neoclassicism taught that humans are not at the top of the natural order, but each is tasked to facilitate the universe's operations by doing one's part. It is because of these concepts of natural orders that many believed at the time that socioeconomic, gendered, and racial hierarchies were predestined, and that it was immoral to aspire for higher status and wealth. On the tail end of Neoclassicism was the cult of sensibility, a movement spearheaded by the 3rd Earl of Shaftesbury, Anthony Ashley Cooper. Unlike others at the time who believed humans were born depraved, Shaftesbury argues that all humans are born without a sense of moral good or bad, but they are born with a sense of the beautiful, which they can use to connect with nature and consequently an understanding of the good and the true. To use this sense of the beautiful to one's advantage, however, it must be exercised, like a muscle, via the practice of pity and feeling. And through sympathy and feeling, one would finally be able to build, maintain, and improve upon a sense of benevolence or goodwill towards others, achieving an ever-evolving virtuous state. A sensible person, then, is one who acts as a barometer of truth and right conduct. They are acutely sensitive as well as responsive to the afflicted and pathetic scenes and conditions around them. And it is in keeping with the movements of this cult of sensibility that many philanthropic social reforms tending the rights of the poor, the enslaved, and, of course, the female, began in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. In the art of this period, whenever you see or read scenes that involve a lot of weeping, it is likely a product of this cult of sensibility, as weeping not only indicates deep feeling, but represents the washing away of boundaries between individuals, allowing greater sympathy, sociability, and bonding. More to the point, sensibility is apparent in the period's depictions of nature. James Thomson, a British poet, was a faithful practitioner of Shakespearean sensibility. In his 4 poems collectively titled The Seasons, Thomson relies on nature to evoke a powerful sense of feeling in his readers. The different seasons, winter, summer, spring, and autumn, are carefully crafted to elicit the corresponding feelings one may feel with each season. Spring, for instance, should echo with feelings of rejuvenation and nurturing. Moreover, in seasons, nature is instructive. Thomson takes the view that nature is the ideal, the word of God manifest in the chilling wind, the hushed air, the livid sky, and it is through the feelings that nature inspires that humans are guided, nurtured, and reinvigorated to pursue what is right and true. It is the artist's responsibility then, as a particularly practiced person of sensibility, to focus the reader's attention on these instructive scenes of nature. Around the middle of the 18th century, however, some were dissatisfied with beauty being the measure of moral being, and thus spawned another shift in artistic perception. Edmund Burke, an Irish philosopher, argued that beauty is too superficial to inspire a greater understanding of the universe. Unlike the Neoclassicists, who defined beauty as harmonious, unified, ordered, and rational, Burke argued that beauty is imperfection. Take, for example, the disproportionate body of the peacock, or the blemish of a birthmark on a woman's face. Such views of nature as imperfect were actually quite insightful for his time. For rather than agree as others would have at the time that nature follows a beautifully predictable clockwork pattern, Burke recognized that nature is irregular, asymmetrical, and irreversible. All beauty does, though, is cause affection and tenderness, meek emotions in Burke's opinion. In order to obtain a greater understanding of the cosmos, he believed that we need an emotion so strong that it would leave no room for reason. This emotion is astonishment, specifically astonishment caused by intense awe and terror. The source of this awe and terror is the sublime, penetratingly bright colors, vacuously dark colors, loud, sudden sounds, obscurity, vastness, and power. These are all sources of the sublime, phenomena that suggest danger or pain, and thus evoke a sense of astonishment and sublimity, which suspend rationality and trigger insight. At this point, we have covered 3 modern approaches to nature: Neoclassicism, sensibility, and sublimity. that have shown us how artists of past have viewed nature as a moral and philosophical teacher via the ideal, beautiful, and terrifying. But nature has served art in other capacities as well. When we look at art from an environmental perspective, we often turn to the Romantic period. Romanticism is a movement that reacted against the orderliness of neoclassic art and sensibility. Rather than experience the world through rationality and sociability, Romantics prized emotional intensity, imagination, and individuality. In a time of great industrialization, urbanization, and war, Romantics turned to nature as their sanctuary from the world of men. Nature was not just salvific, healing, rejuvenating, nurturing, or instructive as it was for earlier artists, but essential to the individual identity and liberation of imagination. Unlike earlier artists that ascribed specific feelings to nature like benevolence or terror, the Romantics cherished nature as evoking the incommunicable and genuine. The wild ingenue, the lonely wanderer, the solitary rebel, the Promethean genius, and the artist in Romantic works are each stock figures that, on one hand, may face an untamed and wondrous nature alternating between the effects of delight and terror, or, on the other hand, face a devastating scene of human disruption where nature has been victimized. In either case, many Romantics felt at one with nature, and as such, used nature as a source of inspiration, self-reflection, and most importantly, authenticity. Into this aesthetic, intellectual, and philosophical landscape develops one of the only indigenous movements in America, Transcendentalism. Unlike neoclassicism and sensibility, which turn to sociability to locate a human sense of morality and truth, Transcendentalism, like Romanticism, accuses society of corrupting a human's goodness. In fact, the two, Transcendentalism and Romanticism, have a few similarities. Both view nature not as a clockwork order, but as a mysterious cosmos, and thus both are reactions against the growing industrialism and materialism of the Western world. Moreover, both saw the self in nature. But this is where the two begin to differ. Romantics value the self as a voice that illuminates the outer world. However, Transcendentalists feel the self and natural world are more holistically connected than this. They believe that if they ever had troubles understanding themselves, they could look to a study of nature, not because nature will inform them of universal laws of human nature, as the neoclassicists would say, but because their view of nature has already been shaped by themselves and so reflect one's own inner mind. For Transcendentalism, then, nature is central to self-identity. This is true in a philosophical and biological sense as well. That is, Transcendentalism is essentially a kind of idealism. For Transcendentalists, the world is simply the shadow of a higher reality or spirit called an oversoul. All life and life processes are unified through this oversoul, and the oversoul is very much like the Christian spirit of God. It's a universal spirit immanent in all nature and human nature. Because of this belief, Transcendentalists adopted what we would call a strong sense of ecological responsibility towards their environment. And whereas Romantics often projected discordance between humans and nature as opposing sides of the artificiality and authenticity or conformity and liberty binaries, Transcendentalism insists that the two, human and non-human, need not be at odds, that the physical world is not a burden or obstacle, but a provider and teacher to be protected. With such ideals, Transcendentalists often appear in art as self-reliant frontiersmen, respectful of all living things, celebrating the iterative commonalities between the individual and universal, and getting down dirty and dusty in nature.